UFC Fight Night Perez vs. Taira is this Saturday, and for each fight, including the prelims, I'm going to compare stats, review recent fight history, analyze the results of each of my 7 data science prediction models, give a combined weighted prediction of those models, and then give a final prediction which considers both quantitative and qualitative information combined. Later this week, I'll also upload a video covering promising underdogs, best inexpensive favorites, and prop bets to consider in order to highlight some opportunities for you guys. Hopefully you can use these predictions and data to confirm your picks, avoid mistakes, and find some value bets, or for just entertainment and informative purposes to prepare for this upcoming event. Please like and subscribe if you find this interesting, informative, or helpful, as it'll help keep me motivated in creating these videos for you all. I've also added my Patreon information in the description if you want to support me through that. There's a $10 a month contribution tier and a $20 a month premium tier, which gives you access to all of the analysis and results from my videos earlier than when the video is uploaded, which I just started including this week, on top of extra data analysis and stats. So that includes my prediction model results, fighter history, stat overviews, promising underdogs, best inexpensive favorites, prop bets to consider, a deep dive into each fighter's record, history, and analysis through each of their individual historical fights so you can see their strengths, their weaknesses, and how consistent they've been in different stats. Also, their stat comparisons versus all of their historical opponents' combined averages, all sorts of stats and data analysis, honestly. And I'll continue to add more over time. You guys know that I love giving you guys everything I can to help you all for events, and I'm continuing to expand and improve on what I have to offer. So all of that combined will help you with your picks and bets, so please check it out. It's $20 a month, which is around $5 per event. You can purchase each event separately, but the membership is much cheaper and easier. Plus, you're directly helping with the improvement and the expansion of the content and this channel, because without you guys, this channel and this community means absolutely nothing. Running this data and analysis, each of the prediction models, fight simulations, charts and graphs, and updating the site takes hours every day and week, so I'd greatly appreciate any support that you guys can show. And thank you all for the recent support that you have shown. I really can't believe I'm over 800 subscribers currently. It truly means the world to me that we can all continue to share our passion for MMA and build this community up together. Last thing that I want to mention is that there is also a BetUS promotion in the description if you want to use that link. It is an affiliate link with them, so if you want to set up your account, you'll get a promotional offer when you do. I took a break last week to try to catch up with work, so I'm happy to be back this week and continue to push this content and analysis for you all. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. For the first fight, we have Melquizael Costa versus Shayilan Nuerdanbieke. Let's go ahead and review their stats. Costa is 5 feet 10 inches tall with a reach of 71 inches and is 27 years old. And on the other hand, Shayilan is 5 feet 8 inches tall with a reach of 69 inches and is 30 years old. When it comes to striking, Costa lands 4.29 strikes per minute at a 46% accuracy, and Shayilan, on the other hand, lands 2.28 strikes per minute at a 45% accuracy. As far as grappling goes, Costa lands 2.49 takedowns on average with a 27% accuracy, while Shayilan, on the other hand, lands 2.9 takedowns on average at a 33% accuracy. Lastly, when it comes to defense, Costa absorbs 2.99 strikes per minute with a 59% striking defense and a 42% takedown defense, whereas Shayilan absorbs 2.94 strikes per minute with a 50% striking defense and a 40% takedown defense. Now let's take a look at Costa's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a loss against Steve Garcia via KO/TKO, which was back in December of 2023. His total record is 20 wins and 7 losses, and out of his 20 wins, 7 of them were KO/TKOs, 6 of them were submissions, and 7 were decision victories, which gives him a 65% finishing rate. Now, out of his 7 losses, 2 of them were KO/TKOs, 2 of them were submissions, and 3 were decision losses. Costa also has 8 first-round finishes, and recently has won 3 out of his last 5 fights, but he is coming off of a loss into this fight. His most recent win was back in July of 2023, and his most recent loss was back in December of 2023. Now let's check out Shayilan's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a loss to Steve Garcia via KO/TKO back in April of 2023. His total record is 39 wins and 11 losses. Now, out of his 39 wins, 19 of them were KO/TKOs, 10 of them were submissions, and 10 were decision victories, which gives him a 74.4% finish rate. Out of his 11 losses, 3 of them were KO/TKOs, 6 of them were submissions, and 2 were decision losses. He also has 26 first-round finishes. Recently, he's won 3 out of his last 5 fights, but he is coming off of a loss into this fight. His most recent win was back in November of 2022, and his most recent loss was back in April of 2023. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that and adds other non-statistics based research and fight film study observations as well. 3 out of 7 of my prediction models are leaning towards Costa and 4 are leaning towards Shayilan. When we weigh the prediction models together, we get a 52% probability of victory for Shayilan. However, after doing all of my research, both in the statistics and outside of the statistics, I'm going to go opposite of the prediction models here, and I'm going to give Costa a 61.1% probability of victory, and that's due to the fact that Costa has a height advantage of 2 inches, he's 3 years younger, he has a reach advantage of 2 inches, he lands 2.01 more strikes per minute, he has a slightly higher striking accuracy, he has a 9% higher striking defense, and he has a 2% higher takedown defense. He's won 20 fights and finished 65% of them, and he's also won 3 of his last 5 fights. But talking about reasons aside from stats alone as to why Costa's going to win, he has a very versatile skill set, he's mentally tough, and he has a striking advantage coming into this fight. He has a well-rounded fighting style which will allow him to adapt to various scenarios, and it makes him a very challenging opponent. His mental resilience was forged through very personal challenges that he went through, and he gives him a pretty good edge when it comes to high pressure situations. Costa is also very proficient in striking, and combined with his height and reach advantage, it's going to enable him to maintain his distance and land effective strikes. Additionally, Shayilan's vulnerabilities in striking defense and his submission susceptibility do present opportunities for Costa to exploit, while Costa's ability to defend takedowns and capitalize on submission openings could neutralize Shayilan's wrestling threat. At the end of the day, I think Costa's going to win. I don't think he's going to get the finish here. I think it's going to go to the judges, and he's going to get the unanimous decision victory. For the next fight, we have Josefine Knutsson versus Julia Polastri. Let's go ahead and review their stats. Josefine is 5 feet 3 inches tall with a reach of 60 inches and is 28 years old. And on the other hand, Julia is 5 feet 2 inches tall with a reach of 63 inches and is 26 years old. When it comes to striking, Josefine lands 3.73 strikes per minute at a 52% accuracy. Julia, on the other hand, lands 6.19 strikes per minute at a 52% accuracy. So she's able to land many more strikes, but at the same accuracy. And as far as grappling goes, Josefine lands 2.67 takedowns on average at a 72% accuracy, while Julia, on the other hand, lands 0.62 takedowns on average at a pretty decent accuracy, but she doesn't land very many. Lastly, when it comes to defense, Josefine absorbs 1.33 strikes per minute at a 64% defense and a pretty good takedown defense, whereas Julia Polastri absorbs 5.11 strikes per minute with a 62% striking defense and a 42% takedown defense. Now let's take a look at Josefine's recent fight history. Recently, she's coming off of a win against Marnik Man via unanimous decision, which was back in September of 2023. Her total record is 7 wins and no losses, and out of her 7 wins, 1 of them was a KO/TKO and 6 of them were decision victories, which gives her a very low 14.3% finish rate. Now let's take a look at Julia's recent fight history. Julia is recently coming off of a win against Patricia Alujas via submission, which was back in September of 2023. Her total record is 12 wins and only 3 losses, and out of her 12 wins, 4 of them were KO/TKOs, 3 of them were submissions, and 5 were decision victories, which gives her a 58% finishing rate. Out of her 3 losses, all 3 of them went to the judges, and she got decision losses. She's had 1 first-round finish, but recently she's won 4 out of her last 5 fights, so she's been doing pretty well, and she is coming off of a 4-fight win streak into this fight. Her most recent win was in September of 2023, and her most recent loss was in September of 2021. Now, unfortunately, I couldn't run these 2 fighters through my prediction models because of the debut. However, the odd probabilities are giving Josefine a 66% probability of victory. And I generally agree with that because Josefine Knutsson has a height advantage here of about an inch. She absorbs 3.8 less strikes per minute. She has a 2% higher striking defense. She lands 2.05 more takedowns on average, and she has a 58% higher takedown defense. She's won 7 fights, she's undefeated, she's finished 14% of the fights, but if you look at that the other way, she's controlled 85% of her fights, she's taken them to the judges, and she's gotten the decision victory. She's won 2 of her 2 UFC fights, but let's talk about reasons aside from stats alone as to why she's likely going to win. Thanks to her Muay Thai and kickboxing, Josefine has superior striking skills, and those skills will allow her to effectively use push kicks, elbows, and knees to disrupt Polastri's rhythm. She has good defensive skills as well, which will make her difficult to control on the ground. Her experience against good opponents, including victories over Marnik Man and Isis Verbeek, showcases her ability to perform under pressure, and her undefeated record will boost her confidence and mental toughness coming into this fight. And on the other hand, Polastri's weak takedown defense and her relative inexperience in high-pressure situations will be significant disadvantages. While Polastri has a reach advantage and strong grappling skills, Knutsson's precise striking and her strong defensive game can frustrate Polastri's attempts to land significant strikes or secure takedowns, which makes Knutsson the likely victor in this matchup. Bottom line, Josefine Knutsson will win via unanimous decision. I don't really see her finishing Polastri, but I do see her controlling the fight and getting the decision victory. I think she's going to go 8-0 after this fight. For the next fight, we have Jeka Saragih versus Westin Wilson. Let's go ahead and review their stats. Jeka is 5 feet 8 inches tall with a reach of 69 inches and is 29 years old. And on the other hand, Westin Wilson is 6 feet 1 inch tall with a reach of 73 inches and is 35 years old. Now when it comes to striking, Jeka lands 2.76 strikes per minute at a 50% accuracy, and Westin Wilson on the other hand lands 2.11 strikes per minute at a 34% accuracy. And as far as grappling goes, Jeka lands 2.37 takedowns on average with a pretty decent accuracy, while Westin Wilson on the other hand doesn't have any takedown stats recorded. And lastly, when it comes to defense, Jeka absorbs 2.84 strikes per minute with a 40% striking defense and a 66% takedown defense, whereas Westin Wilson absorbs 6.62 strikes per minute with a 28% striking defense. Now let's take a look at Jeka's recent fight history. Recently, Jeka's coming off of a win against Lucas Alexander, which was via KO/TKO back in November of 2023. His total record is 14 wins and 3 losses, and out of those 14 wins, 9 of them were KO/TKOs and 4 of them were submissions, with only 1 decision victory, which gives him a very high 93% finish rate. Now out of his 3 losses, 1 of them was a KO/TKO and the other 2 were submission losses. He also has 8 first-round finishes, and recently he's won 4 out of his last 5 fights, and he is coming off of a win into this fight. His most recent win was in November of 2023, and his most recent loss was in February of 2023. Now let's take a look at Westin Wilson's recent fight history. Recently he's coming off of a loss against Silva via KO/TKO, which was back in January of this year. Now his total record is 16 wins and 9 losses, and out of his 16 wins, 5 of them were KO/TKOs, 11 were submissions, and he has no decision victories, which gives him a crazy 100% finishing rate. Out of his 9 losses, 3 of them were KO/TKOs, 4 were submissions, and 2 were decision losses. He also has 14 first-round finishes, and recently he's won 3 out of his last 5 fights, but he is coming off of a 2-fight losing streak coming into this fight. His most recent win was in March of 2023, and his most recent loss was in January of 2024. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that and adds other non-statistics based research and fight film study observations into account as well. 4 of 7 of my prediction models are leaning towards Jeka, and 3 are leaning towards Westin Wilson. And when we weigh the prediction models together, we get a 56.4% probability of victory for Jeka. Now for my final prediction, I give Jeka a more confident 69% probability of victory. And that's due to the fact that Jeka is 6 years younger, he lands 0.65 more strikes per minute, he has a 16% higher striking accuracy, he absorbs 3.78 less strikes per minute, and he has a 12% higher striking defense. He's won 14 fights, he's finished 93% of them, he's won 3 of his 4 UFC fights, recently he's won 4 out of his last 5 fights, and the list goes on and on. But let's talk about reasons aside from stats alone. He has superior striking power and a lot of recent momentum. He's also won Performance of the Night recently with a first-round knockout. He's a mentally tough fighter, he's overcame a lot of challenges in his life, and all of those things contribute to his resilience inside the octagon. And while Wilson is skilled in grappling, Saragih's balanced skill set, including his submission wins, indicates that he's able to handle ground exchanges if necessary. Wilson's recent knockout losses and his slower, predictable striking defense makes him very vulnerable to Saragih's aggressive style and his precise striking. Additionally, Saragih's drive, fueled by national expectations as the first Indonesian UFC fighter, further bolsters his chances of victory. All things considered, I think Saragih is going to win via a flashy KO/TKO, and I think he's going to make a statement in this fight. For the next fight, we have Carli Judice versus Gabriella Fernandes. Let's go ahead and review their stats. Carli Judice is 5 feet 7 inches tall with a reach of 68 inches and is 25 years old. On the other hand, Gabriella Fernandes is 5 feet 6 inches tall with a reach of 66 inches and is 30 years old. Now before we get into the fighting stats, I do want to let you all know that Carli Judice's stats come from only 1 fight. So when it comes to striking, Carli Judice lands 11 strikes per minute at a 57% accuracy. Gabriella Fernandes, on the other hand, lands 1.63 strikes per minute at a 47% accuracy. And lastly, when it comes to defense, Carli absorbs 12.27 strikes per minute at a 54% striking defense and a 50% takedown defense, whereas Gabriella absorbs 2.7 strikes per minute with a 47% striking defense and a 61% takedown defense. Now let's check out Carli's recent fight history. Recently, Carli's coming off of a loss against Ernesta Katakate via split decision back in September 26, 2023. Her total record is 3 wins and 1 loss. All 3 of her wins were via KO/TKO, and her loss was via decision. All 3 of her wins were also first round finishes, and recently of course she's won 3 of her last 5 fights, but she is coming off of a loss into this one. Her most recent win was back in May of 2023, and her most recent loss was back in September of 2023. Now let's take a look at Gabriella Fernandes' recent fight history. Recently, Gabriella is coming off of a loss against Teresa Bleda via unanimous decision, which was back in June of 2023. Her total record is 8 wins and 3 losses, and out of her 8 wins, 3 of them were KO/TKOs, 2 of them were submissions, and 3 were decision victories, which gives her a 63% finishing rate. All 3 of her losses were decision losses. She has 1 first-round finish. Recently, she's won 3 of her last 5 fights, but she's currently on a 2-fight losing streak. Her most recent win was in September of 2022, and her most recent loss was back in June of 2023. Now, unfortunately, I couldn't run these 2 fighters through my prediction models because of the debut. However, the odd probabilities are giving Gabriella Fernandes a 67% probability of victory, and I generally agree with that because Gabriella Fernandes absorbs 9.5 less strikes per minute. She has an 11% higher takedown defense as well. She's won 8 fights and finished 63% of them, and she's won 3 of her last 5 fights. But let's step aside from stats alone, especially in this fight, to talk about why Gabriella will likely win. Gabriella has a very diverse skill set. She has extensive experience, and she has a strategic fighting approach. Fernandes' proficiency in judo, BJJ, Muay Thai, and kickboxing gives her a very versatile and unpredictable skill set, which makes her a very challenging opponent in the octagon. She's capable of adapting to various fight scenarios. She's shown that she can finish fights by both submissions and knockouts, and that showcases her mental toughness and her resilience despite her recent losses. Fernandes' strategic use of grappling to control her opponents and exploit Judice's weaker ground game will give her a significant advantage. While Judice is a powerful striker with excellent cardio, her lack of experience and ground proficiency makes Fernandes the more likely victor in this matchup. I'm not saying that Fernandes will be able to finish her, but I do think that Fernandes has a lot of weapons in her arsenal that will allow her to control the fight enough to get to the judges and get the decision victory. So bottom line, I'm giving Fernandes the decision here, and I think she's going to win. For the next fight, we have Josh Quinlan versus Adam Fugitt. Let's go and review their stats. Josh Quinlan is 6 feet tall with a reach of 72 inches and is 31 years old. And on the other hand, Adam is 6 feet 1 inch tall with a reach of 77 inches and is 35 years old. When it comes to striking, Josh lands 3.6 strikes per minute at a 42% accuracy. Adam, on the other hand, lands 4.3 strikes per minute at a 54% accuracy. As far as grappling goes, Josh lands 0.51 takedowns on average at an 11% accuracy, while Adam, on the other hand, lands 3.43 takedowns on average at a 33% accuracy. And lastly, when it comes to defense, Josh absorbs 6.91 strikes per minute with a 49% striking defense and a 60% takedown defense, whereas Adam, on the other hand, absorbs 5.13 strikes per minute with a 48% striking defense and a 50% takedown defense. Now let's take a look at Josh's recent fight history. Recently, Josh is coming off of a loss against Danny Barlow via KO/TKO, which was back in February of this year. His total record is 6 wins and 2 losses, and out of his 6 wins, 4 of them were KO/TKOs and the other 2 were submissions, which gives him a 100% finishing rate. Out of his 2 losses, 1 of them was a KO/TKO and the other was a decision loss. He also has 3 first-round finishes. Recently, he's only won 2 out of his last 5 fights, and he is coming off of a 2-fight losing streak into this fight. His most recent win was in August of 2022, and his most recent loss was in February of 2024. Now let's take a look at Adam's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a loss against Mike Mallow via submission back in June of 2023. His total record is 9 wins and 4 losses, and out of his 9 wins, 5 of them were KO/TKOs, 3 of them were submissions, and 1 was a decision victory, which gives him a respectable 89% finishing rate. Now, out of his 4 losses, 2 of them were KO/TKOs, 1 of them was a submission, and the last one was a decision loss. Adam also has 3 first-round finishes, and recently he's won 3 out of his last 5 fights, but he is coming off of a loss into this fight. His most recent win was in February of 2023, and his most recent loss was back in June of 2023. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that and adds other non-statistics based research and fight film study observations into account as well. Only 1 of 7 of my prediction models are leaning towards Josh Quinlan, and the other 6 are leaning towards Adam. and when we weigh the prediction models together, we get a 63% probability of victory for Adam. However, based on all of my research combined, I'm going to go opposite of the prediction models here, and I'm going to give Josh Quinlan a very narrow 50.3% probability of victory, and that's due to the fact that Josh is 4 years younger. He has a slightly better striking defense. He has a 10% higher takedown defense as well. He's won 6 fights, and he's finished all of them. He's also won 1 of his 3 UFC fights. And I do acknowledge that recently he's only won 2 of his last 5 fights, and he is coming off of a 2-fight losing streak, but there are reasons aside from just stats alone as to why I think Josh is going to win this one. Josh has an impressive amount of knockout power and finishing ability, and that's evidenced by his 4 knockouts and his 2 submissions. He's a black belt in BJJ, and that really enhances his versatility, and that makes him a threat both on his feet and on the ground. He also has a great takedown defense rate, which will allow him to maintain the fight in his preferred striking range, whereas Adam's vulnerabilities, including his low striking defense, makes him very susceptible to strikes. Despite Adam's reach advantage and his balanced skills, Quinlan's ability to exploit defensive gaps and his motivation to win his last UFC contract fight will give him a strategic and momentous edge. After doing all of my research, I honestly do think that Quinlan will get a KO/TKO in this fight. For the next fight, we have Jimmy Flick versus Nate Maness. Let's go ahead and review their stats. Jimmy is 5 feet 7 inches tall with a reach of 68 inches and is 33 years old. On the other hand, Nate is 5 feet 10 inches tall with a reach of 72 inches and is 32 years old. Now, when it comes to striking, Jimmy lands 1.7 strikes per minute at a 50% accuracy. Nate Maness, on the other hand, lands 2.33 strikes per minute at a 48% accuracy. As far as grappling goes, Jimmy lands 1.79 takedowns on average with a 26% accuracy, while Nate Maness, on the other hand, lands only 0.87 takedowns on average, but with a better accuracy at 75%. Now, lastly, when it comes to defense, Jimmy Flick absorbs 5.2 strikes per minute with a 40% striking defense, whereas Nate Maness absorbs 4.29 strikes per minute with a 40% striking defense and a 78% takedown defense. Now let's take a look at Jimmy's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a win against Malcolm Gordon via submission back in January of 2024. His total record is 17 wins and 7 losses, and out of his 17 wins, 15 of them were via submissions, 0 of them were KO/TKOs, and the other 2 were decision victories, which still gives him an 88.3% finishing rate thanks to those submissions. Now, out of his 7 losses, 6 of them were KO/TKOs and 1 was a decision loss. He also has 8 first-round finishes, and recently he's won 3 out of his last 5 fights, and he is coming off of a win into this fight. His most recent win was in January of 2024, and his most recent loss was in June of 2023. Now let's take a look at Nate's recent fight history. Recently, Nate's coming off of a win against Ulanbekov via KO/TKO, which was on October of 2023. His total record is 15 wins and only 3 losses, and out of those 15 wins, 6 of them were KO/TKOs, 3 of them were submissions, and 6 were decision victories, which gives him a 60% finishing rate. Out of his 3 losses, 1 of them was a KO/TKO, 1 of them was a submission, and 1 was a decision loss. He also has 5 first-round finishes, and recently he's won 3 out of his last 5 fights, and he is coming off of a win as well into this fight. His most recent win was in October of 2023, and his most recent loss was back in November of 2022. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that and adds other non-statistics based research and fight film study observations as well. Only 1 of 7 of my prediction models are leaning towards Jimmy Flick, and the other 6 are leaning towards Nate Maness. When we weigh the prediction models together, we get a 65% probability of victory for Nate. Now for my final prediction, I give Nate an even more confident 75% probability of victory. And there's several statistical and non-statistical reasons for that. For starters, he has a height advantage of 3 inches, he is the younger fighter, he has a reach advantage of 4 inches, he lands 0.63 more strikes per minute, he absorbs 0.91 less strikes per minute, and he has a 49% higher takedown accuracy. He's also won 15 fights, finished 60% of them, and he's won 4 of his 6 UFC fights. Recently, he's won 3 out of his last 5 fights, and he is coming off of a win as well. But let's talk about those reasons aside from stats. Nate Maness has a very versatile skill set, which includes effective striking and grappling, which makes him an overall well-rounded fighter. He has a significant height and reach advantage, which will help him control the distance and keep Flick at bay with long-range strikes. Maness's mental toughness, demonstrated in his comeback win against Tony Gravely and his recent first-round TKO victory against Ulanbekov, have boosted his confidence and his momentum. While Flick is an exceptional grappler with numerous submission wins, his weaknesses in striking defense and takedown defense can be exploited by Maness, who can maintain a high output of strikes and incorporate takedowns to disrupt Flick's rhythm. At the end of the day, I think Maness is going to win, and I think he's actually going to get the finish. I'm going to take Maness via KO/TKO. For the next fight, we have Tagir Ulanbekov versus Joshua Van. Let's go ahead and review their stats. Tagir is 5 feet 7 inches tall with a reach of 70 inches and is 32 years old. And on the other hand, Joshua is 5 feet 5 inches tall with a reach of 65 inches and is 22 years old. When it comes to striking, Tagir lands 3.22 strikes per minute at a 45% accuracy. And Joshua, on the other hand, lands 9.08 strikes per minute at a 53% accuracy. Now, as far as grappling goes, Tagir lands 3.71 takedowns on average at a 46% accuracy, while Joshua, on the other hand, only lands 1.14 takedowns on average at a 42% accuracy. And lastly, when it comes to defense, Tagir absorbs 3.3 strikes per minute with a 51% striking defense and a 61% takedown defense, whereas Joshua absorbs 5.77 strikes per minute with a 60% striking defense and a 78% takedown defense. Now let's take a look at Tagir's recent fight history. Recently, Tagir is coming off of a win against Cody Durden via submission back in December of 2023. His total record is 15 wins and only 2 losses, and out of those 15 wins, 1 of them was a KO/TKO, 8 of them were submissions, and 6 were decision victories, which gives him a 60% finishing rate. Out of his 2 losses, both of them were decision losses. He does have 4 first-round finishes, and recently he's won 4 out of his last 5 fights, and he's on a 2-fight win streak. His most recent win was in December of 2023, and his most recent loss was actually back in March of 2022. Now let's take a look at Joshua's recent fight history. Recently, Joshua was coming off of a win against Felipe via KO/TKO back in January of 2024. His total record is 10 wins and only 1 loss, and out of his 10 wins, 6 of them were KO/TKOs, 2 of them were submissions, and 2 were decision victories, which gives him a flat 80% finishing rate. Now, his 1 loss was a submission loss, but he does have 2 first-round finishes, and recently he's won all 5 of his last 5 fights, and he's on an 8-fight win streak. His most recent win was back in January of 2024, and his most recent loss was actually all the way back in December of 2021. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that and adds other non-statistics based research and fight film study observations into account as well. 1 out of 7 of my prediction models are leaning towards Tagir, and the other 6 are leaning towards Joshua Van. And when we weigh the prediction models together, we get a 64.1% probability of victory for Joshua Van. However, after doing my research outside of just statistics alone, I am going to go opposite of the prediction models here, and I'm going to give Tagir Ulanbekov a 59.6% probability of victory, and that's due to the fact that Tagir Ulanbekov has a height advantage of 2 inches, he has a reach advantage of 5 inches, he absorbs 2.47 less strikes per minute, he lands 2.57 more takedowns on average, and he has a higher takedown accuracy as well. He's won 15 fights, he's finished 60% of them, he's won 4 of his 5 UFC fights, and he's recently won 4 of his last 5 fights, and he is coming off of a 2-fight win streak. But let's talk about reasons aside from stats alone as to why Tagir will likely win. He has elite wrestling and grappling skills, and he was trained under the guidance of Abdulmanap Nurmagomedov. And in case you guys don't know, that is former lightweight champion Khabib Nurmagomedov's dad, who also trained and in a way kind of raised current champion Islam Makhachev, who was former world Sambo champion as well. So he's trained with some of the toughest and most grappling skilled Dagestani fighters and champions. Ulanbekov's ability to control opponents on the ground and secure submissions, combined with his experience and his composure in high stakes fights, makes him a challenging opponent in this matchup. His strategic fight IQ will allow him to implement effective game plans and adapt mid-fight, as demonstrated in that fight against Cody Durden. While Van has strong striking power and an aggressive style, his weaker grappling defense is a vulnerability that Ulanbekov can exploit, potentially leading to a submission victory if Ulanbekov can manage the fight's pace and positioning. Ultimately, I think Ulanbekov will control the fight. I think he's going to take it to the judges and get a unanimous decision victory. For the next fight, we have Brady Hiestand versus Garrett Armfield. Let's go ahead and review their stats. Brady is 5 feet 8 inches tall with a reach of 71 inches and is 25 years old. On the other hand, Garrett Armfield is 5 feet 6 inches tall with a reach of 70 inches and is 27 years old. When it comes to striking, Brady lands 2.93 strikes per minute at a 52% accuracy, and Garrett on the other hand lands 6.22 strikes per minute at a 53% striking accuracy. As far as grappling goes, Brady lands 4.06 takedowns on average at a 46% accuracy, while Garrett on the other hand does not have any takedown stats recorded. And lastly, when it comes to defense, Brady absorbs 3.65 strikes per minute with a 53% striking defense and a 42% takedown defense, whereas Garrett absorbs 3.93 strikes per minute with a 58% striking defense and a 64% takedown defense. Now let's take a look at Brady's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a win against Gabriella via KO/TKO back in April of 2023. His total record is 8 wins and 2 losses, and out of his 8 wins, 4 of them were KO/TKOs, 2 of them were submissions, and 2 were decision victories, which gives him a 75% finishing rate. Out of his 2 losses, 1 of them was a KO/TKO and the other was a decision loss. He also has 5 first-round finishes, and recently he's won 4 out of his last 5 fights, and he is on a 2-fight win streak coming into this fight. His last win was in April of 2023, and his last loss was in August of 2021. Now let's take a look at Garrett's recent fight history. Recently, Garrett's coming off of a win against Katana via unanimous decision, which was back in January of 2024. His total record is 10 wins and 3 losses, and out of his 10 wins, 6 of them were KO/TKOs, 2 of them were submissions, and 2 were decision victories, which gives him an 80% finishing rate. Out of his 3 losses, 2 of them were submissions, and 1 was a decision loss. He also has 7 first-round finishes. Recently, he's won 4 out of his last 5 fights, and he is also on a 2-fight win streak coming into this fight. Now, his most recent win was in January of 2024, and his most recent loss was back in July of 2022. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that and adds other non-statistics based research and fight film study observations as well. None of my prediction models are leaning towards Brady, and all 7 are leaning towards Garrett. And when we weigh the prediction models together, we get a 71.1% probability of victory for Garrett. Now for my final prediction, I give Garrett a slightly less confident 66% probability of victory. And that's due to the fact that Brady has a height advantage of 2 inches, he's 2 years younger, he has a reach advantage of 1 inch, he absorbs 0.28 less strikes per minute as well. Now the reason that I'm picking Garrett is due to the fact that Garrett lands 3.29 more strikes per minute, he has a slightly higher striking accuracy, he has a 5% higher striking defense, and he has a 22% higher takedown defense. Garrett's won 10 fights and he's finished 80% of them. He's won 2 of his 3 UFC fights, and recently he's won 4 of his last 5 fights, and he is coming off of a 2-fight win streak. But let's talk about reasons aside from stats alone. Garrett has superior boxing skills, which will enable him to land these fast, powerful combinations and control striking exchanges. He also has a lot of confidence and momentum coming into this fight. He has solid defensive wrestling, which will help him avoid takedowns and keep this fight in his preferred striking range. He's also mentally tough, he's overcame adversity, and he's fought on short notice, and he's had some financial challenges as well, which he's overcame, which just further strengthens his resilience as a fighter. I think that by exploiting Hiestands' defensive lapses and maintaining his distance to neutralize any kind of grappling threats, Armfield's well-rounded skill set and his strategic approach will make him the clear victor in this matchup. Ultimately, I think he's going to control the fight. I don't see him getting a finish, even though he has a good finishing rate. I think he's going to take it to the judges and get a unanimous decision victory. For the next fight, we have Almabayev versus Jose Johnson. Let's go ahead and review their stats. Almabayev is 5 feet 4 inches tall with a reach of 65 inches and is 30 years old. And on the other hand, Jose Johnson is 6 feet tall with a reach of 71 inches and is 29 years old. Now when it comes to striking, Almabayev lands 3.02 strikes per minute at a 59% accuracy, and Johnson on the other hand lands 2.8 strikes per minute at a 60% accuracy. As far as grappling goes, Almabayev lands 7.12 takedowns on average at a 57% accuracy, while Johnson on the other hand lands only 0.62 takedowns on average with a 50% accuracy. And lastly, when it comes to defense, Almabayev absorbs 1.42 strikes per minute with a 53% striking defense and no takedown defense recorded, whereas Jose Johnson on the other hand absorbs 1.73 strikes per minute with a 55% striking defense and a 36% takedown defense. Now let's take a look at Almabayev's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a win against CJ Vergara via unanimous decision, which was back in March of 2024. His total record is 19 wins and only 2 losses, and out of his 19 wins, 3 of them were KO/TKOs, 9 of them were submissions, and 7 were decision victories, which gives him a 63% finishing rate. Out of his 2 losses, 1 of them was a KO/TKO and the other was a decision loss. He also has 5 first-round finishes, and recently he's won all 5 of his last 5 fights, and he is on a crazy 15-fight win streak. His most recent win was back in March of 2024, and his most recent loss was back in March of 2017. Now let's take a look at Jose Johnson's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a win against Chad and Helliger via submission back in November of 2023. His total record is 16 wins and 8 losses, and out of his 16 wins, 8 of them were KO/TKOs, 3 of them were submissions, and 5 were decision victories, which gives him a 69% finishing rate. Out of his 8 losses, 1 was a KO/TKO, 4 of them were submission losses, and 3 were decision losses. He also has 8 first-round finishes. Recently, he has won 4 of his last 5 fights, and he is coming off of a win into this fight. His most recent win was in November of 2023, and his most recent loss was in August of 2023. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that and adds other non-statistics based research and fight film study observations as well. 6 of 7 of my prediction models are leaning towards Almabayev, and only 1 is leaning towards Jose Johnson. And when we weigh the prediction models together, we get a 64% probability of victory for Almabayev. Now for my final prediction, I give Almabayev an even more confident 75% probability of victory. And that's due to the fact that Almabayev lands 0.22 more strikes per minute, he absorbs 0.31 less strikes per minute, he lands 6.5 more takedowns on average, he has a 7% higher takedown accuracy, and he lands 0.7 more submissions on average. He's won 19 fights and finished 63% of them, and he's also won 2 of his 2 UFC fights. He's recently won all 5 of his last 5 fights, and he is coming off of a crazy 15-fight win streak. The last time he lost was actually all the way back in March of 2017. Let's talk about things aside from stats alone now. Almabayev has crazy good grappling skills and impressive momentum as well. His ability to control opponents on the ground and secure his submissions is a very significant advantage in this fight, especially against Johnson, who has shown vulnerability to submissions in the past. He's entering this fight with a very strong 15-fight win streak, and his confidence and proven track record of success really bolsters his chances of winning this fight as well. His defensive skills, particularly in avoiding significant strikes, makes him a very difficult opponent to outpoint or even knock out. Despite Johnson's striking skills and his reach advantage, Almabayev's grappling dominance and his experience against good opponents gives him the strategic edge, making him a solid fighter in this matchup. I do think that Almabayev is going to take control, and I actually think he's going to get the submission victory in this fight, so I'm going to go Almabayev via submission. For the next fight, we have Douglas Silva de Andrade versus Miles Johns. Let's go ahead and review their stats. Douglas Silva de Andrade is 5 feet 7 inches tall with a reach of 68 inches and is 38 years old. And on the other hand, Miles Johns is 5 feet 7 inches tall with a reach of 66 inches and is 30 years old. When it comes to striking, Douglas lands 3.66 strikes per minute at a 38% accuracy. Miles Johns, on the other hand, lands 3.28 strikes per minute at a 47% accuracy. As far as grappling goes, Douglas Silva de Andrade lands 0.61 takedowns on average at a 46% accuracy, while Johns, on the other hand, lands 1.15 takedowns on average at a 22% accuracy. And lastly, when it comes to defense, Douglas absorbs 3.99 strikes per minute with a 58% striking defense and a 70% takedown defense, whereas Miles Johns, on the other hand, absorbs 2.55 strikes per minute with a 68% striking defense and an 85% takedown defense. Now let's take a look at Douglas's recent fight history. Recently, Silva de Andrade is coming off of a win against Cody Stamann via unanimous decision, which was back in May of 2023. His total record is 29 wins and 5 losses, and out of his 29 wins, 20 of them have been KO/TKOs, 2 of them were submissions, and 7 were decision victories, which gives him a 76% finishing rate. Out of his 5 losses, 1 of them was a KO/TKO, 1 of them was a submission, and the last 3 were decision losses. He has 11 first-round finishes, and recently he has won 3 of his last 5 fights, and he's also coming off of a win into this fight. His most recent win was back in May of 2023, his most recent loss was back in July of 2022. Now let's take a look at Miles Johns' recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a win against Cody Gibson via unanimous decision, which was back in March of 2024. His total record is 14 wins and 2 losses, and out of his 14 wins, 4 of them were KO/TKOs, 2 were submissions, and 8 were decision victories, which gives him a 43% finishing rate. Out of his 2 losses, 1 was a KO/TKO and the other was a submission loss. He doesn't have any first-round finishes, but recently he has won 3 of his last 5 fights, and he's coming off of a win into this fight. His most recent win was in March of 2024, and his most recent loss was in February of 2022. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that and adds other non-statistics based research and fight film study observations as well. 3 of 7 of my prediction models are leaning towards Douglas, and the other 4 are leaning towards Miles Johns. And when we weigh the prediction models together, we get a 57.4% probability of victory for Miles Johns. Now for my final prediction, I give Miles a slightly less confident 54% probability of victory, and that's due to the fact that Douglas does have a reach advantage of 2 inches, he lands 0.4 more strikes per minute, and he has a 24% higher takedown accuracy. Now the reason I am picking Miles Johns is due to the fact that Miles Johns is the much younger fighter. He's 8 years younger. He also has a 9% higher striking accuracy. He absorbs 1.44 less strikes per minute. He has a 10% higher striking defense. He lands 0.54 more takedowns on average, and he has a 15% higher takedown defense as well. He's won 14 fights. He's finished 43% of them. He's won 5 of 8 of his UFC fights, and recently he's won 3 of his last 5 fights, and he's coming off of that win. But let's talk about reasons aside from stats alone here. Miles Johns has a strong wrestling background. We can expect him to control the fight as soon as it gets to the ground, and that will neutralize Silva de Andrade's striking power. He's in his physical prime, and that provides him an edge when it comes to endurance and recovery over the 38-year-old Silva de Andrade, who has a history of injuries. Johns' recent momentum, with 4 wins in his last 5 fights, along with his mental toughness and his adaptability, will further support his chances of winning. While Silva de Andrade's explosive striking power and his experience are notable and respectable, Johns' strategic approach, his physical advantages, and his really strong wrestling skills are likely to secure him the victory in this fight. I don't think that he's going to get the finish, but I do see him controlling this fight, taking it to the judges, and ultimately getting a decision victory. So I'm going to go Johns via decision. For the next fight, we have Timmy Kwamba versus Lucas Almeida. Let's go ahead and review their stats. Timmy is 5 feet 9 inches tall with a reach of 71 inches and is 25 years old. And on the other hand, Lucas is 5 feet 11 inches tall with a reach of 71 inches and is 33 years old. When it comes to striking, Timmy lands 2.53 strikes per minute at a 34% accuracy. And Lucas, on the other hand, lands 5.05 strikes per minute at a 47% accuracy. As far as grappling goes, Timmy lands 0.5 takedowns on average at a very low 16% accuracy, while Lucas, on the other hand, doesn't have any takedown stats recorded. And when it comes to defense, Timmy absorbs 4.23 strikes per minute with a 57% striking defense and a 71% takedown defense, whereas Lucas Almeida absorbs 5.32 strikes per minute with a 45% striking defense and a 40% takedown defense. Now let's take a look at Timmy's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a loss against Balaji Oki via split decision back in February of this year. His total record is 8 wins and only 2 losses, and out of his 8 wins, 4 of them were KO/TKOs and the other 4 were decision victories, which gives him a flat 50% finishing rate. Out of his 2 losses, 1 of them was a submission loss and the other was a decision loss. He also has 2 first-round finishes. Recently, he has won 4 of his last 5 fights, but he is coming off of a loss into this fight. His most recent win was in February of 2024, and his most recent loss was in February of 2024 as well, just 9 days later. He won his fight in Tough Enough, which was that February 1st fight, and then he ended up losing on the Hermanson vs. Pfeiffer card on February 10th, just 9 days later. Now let's take a look at Lucas Almeida's recent fight history. Lucas Almeida is coming off of a loss against Andre Fili via KO/TKO back in December of 2023. Now his total record is 14 wins and only 3 losses, and out of his 14 wins, 9 of them were KO/TKOs and 5 of them were submissions, which gives him a 100% finishing rate. Out of his 3 losses, 1 of them was a KO/TKO, 1 of them was a submission, and the other was a decision loss. He also has 9 first-round finishes. Recently, he's only won 2 of his last 5 fights, and he is currently on a 2-fight losing streak. His most recent win was in June of 2022, and his most recent loss was in December of 2023. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that and adds other non-statistics based research and fight film study observations as well into account. Now 0 of 7 of my prediction models are leaning towards Timmy, and all 7 are leaning towards Lucas Almeida. And when I weighed the prediction models together, I got a 73.3% probability of victory for Lucas. However, after doing all my research, I'm actually going to go opposite of the prediction models here, and I'm going to give Timmy a very narrow 52% probability of victory. As due to the fact that Timmy is 8 years younger, he's absorbed 1.09 less strikes per minute, he has a 12% higher striking defense, and he has a 31% higher takedown defense. He's also won 8 fights, finished half of them, and he's controlled the other half, and recently he's won 4 out of his last 5 fights. Now let's go ahead and discuss reasons aside from stats alone as to why Timmy's likely going to win. Timmy has a lot of momentum coming into this fight, and he's also mentally tough. He's rebounded from past setbacks, and he secured a UFC contract with a series of impressive victories. Kwamba's versatile striking, including a variety of kicks and punches, is expected to exploit Almeida's defensive weaknesses, particularly against high-volume strikers. His aggressive style and his relentless pace can wear down Almeida, who has struggled against fighters who push the tempo. However, Kwamba must be careful of Almeida's well-rounded skill set and his UFC experience, which can pose a threat, especially if the fight goes to the ground. Despite Kwamba's lack of UFC experience, his high work rate and his ability to capitalize on Almeida's defensive lapses make him a stronger contender in this fight. Bottom line, I think that Kwamba is going to take this fight. I don't think that he's going to get the finish. He doesn't have a very strong finishing capability. I think he's going to control the fight and take it to the judges and get the decision victory. For the next fight, we have Ikram Aliskerov versus Antonio Tricoli. Let's go and review their stats. Ikram is 6 feet tall with a reach of 76 inches and is 31 years old. And on the other hand, Antonio is 6 feet 5 inches tall with a reach of 82 inches and is 33 years old. Now, before we get into the fighting stats, I do want to let you guys know that Antonio's stats come from only one fight. So when it comes to striking, Ikram lands 8.24 strikes per minute at a 65% accuracy. Antonio, on the other hand, lands 1.27 strikes per minute at a 71% accuracy. As far as grappling goes, Ikram lands 2.33 takedowns on average at a 33% accuracy, while Antonio, on the other hand, lands 3.8 takedowns on average at a pretty good accuracy. Now lastly, when it comes to defense, Ikram absorbs 7.15 strikes per minute with a 36% striking defense, while Antonio, on the other hand, absorbs 4.56 strikes per minute with a 25% striking defense and a pretty good takedown defense as well. Now let's take a look at Ikram Aliskerov's recent fight history. Recently, Ikram's coming off of a win against Warlley Alves via KO/TKO back in October of 2023. His total record is 15 wins and only 1 loss, and out of his 15 wins, 6 of them were via KO/TKOs, 5 of them were via submissions, and 4 were decision victories, which gives him a 73.4% finishing rate. Now, his 1 loss was a KO/TKO loss. He does have 7 first-round finishes, and recently he's won all 5 of his last 5 fights, and he's on a 7-fight win streak. His most recent win was back in October of 2023, and his most recent loss was actually all the way back in April of 2019. Now let's take a look at Antonio's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a no contest against Kenneth Burke, which was back in July of 2019. Now, Antonio's total record is 11 wins and only 3 losses, and out of those 11 wins, 3 of them were KO/TKOs, 5 of them were submissions, and 3 were decision victories, which gives him a 73% finishing rate. His 3 losses were split, 1 of them was a KO/TKO, and the other 2 were decision losses. He has 3 first-round finishes, and recently he's only won 2 of his last 5 fights, but he is coming off of a win into this fight. His most recent win was in November of 2021, and his most recent loss was actually back in July of 2017. Now, unfortunately, I couldn't run these 2 fighters through my prediction models because of the debut. However, the odd probabilities are giving Ikram Aliskerov a 86.4% probability of victory, and I generally agree with that range because Ikram is 2 years younger, he lands 6.97 more strikes per minute, and he has an 11% higher striking defense. He's won 15 fights, and he's finished 73.4% of them, and he's won 2 of his 2 UFC fights. Recently, he's won 5 of his last 5 fights, and he's coming off of a 7-fight win streak. But let's talk about reasons aside from stats alone. He has superior grappling skills from his combat sambo background, which does give him an edge when it comes to submissions and taking the fight to the ground. I think that he's carrying a lot of good momentum coming into this fight. He has a great winning streak, and he has impressive knockouts, and he showcased his ability to finish fights decisively. His mental fortitude, which was forged through adversity, ensures composure under pressure when it comes to fighting. In contrast, Tricoli's inactivity since 2021 and his past controversies, which includes a failed drug test and visa issues, could hinder his performance. Aliskerov's versatility in striking and grappling, combined with his recent success and mental resilience, makes him a challenging and unpredictable opponent when it comes to this fight, and I think that gives him a clear advantage over Tricoli in this matchup. I'm going to take Aliskerov via KO/TKO. I do think that he's going to get the finish in this fight. For the next fight, we have our main event. I know a lot of you are excited about this one. We have Alex Perez versus Tatsuro Taira. Let's go ahead and review their stats. Alex Perez is 5 feet 6 inches tall with a reach of 65 inches and is 32 years old. And on the other hand, Tatsuro Taira is 5 feet 7 inches tall with a reach of 70 inches and is 24 years old. When it comes to striking, Alex Perez lands 4.1 strikes per minute at a 45% accuracy. Tatsuro Taira, on the other hand, lands 3.51 strikes per minute at a 71% accuracy. As far as grappling goes, Alex Perez lands 2.06 takedowns on average at a 44% accuracy, while Taira on the other hand lands 2.12 takedowns on average at a lower 41% accuracy. And lastly, when it comes to defense, Alex Perez absorbs 3.13 strikes per minute with a 59% striking defense and an 82% takedown defense, whereas Taira absorbs 1.15 strikes per minute with a 47% striking defense and a 71% takedown defense. Now let's take a look at Alex Perez's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a win against Matheus Nicolau via KO/TKO, which was back in April of 2024. His total record is 25 wins and 8 losses, and out of those 25 wins, 6 of them were KO/TKOs, 7 of them were submissions, and 12 were decision victories, which gives him a 52% finishing rate. Out of his 8 losses, 1 was a KO/TKO, 5 were submission losses, and 2 were decision losses. He also has 11 first-round finishes. Recently, he's only won 2 of his last 5 fights, but he is coming off of a win into this fight. His most recent win was in April of 2024, and his most recent loss was back in March of 2024. Now let's take a look at Taira's recent fight history. Recently, he's coming off of a win against Carlos Fernandes via KO/TKO back in December of 2023. His total record is 15 wins and no losses, so he is undefeated. And out of his 15 wins, 4 of them were KO/TKOs, 7 of them were submissions, and 4 were decision victories. He also has 8 first-round finishes, and his most recent win was in December of 2023. Now let's take a look at what my prediction models predicted, their weighted average, and my final pick that takes that and adds other non-statistics based research and fight film study observations into account as well. Only 1 of 7 of my prediction models are leaning towards Alex Perez and 6 are leaning towards Taira. And when we weigh the prediction models together, we get a 56.3% probability victory for Taira. Now for my final prediction, I'm actually going to give Taira a more confident 62% probability of victory, as due to the fact that Taira has a height advantage of 1 inch. He's the much younger fighter, he's 8 years younger, he has a reach advantage of 5 inches, he has a 26% higher striking accuracy, he absorbs almost 2 less strikes per minute, he lands more takedowns on average, and he lands 1.5 more submissions on average as well. He's won 15 fights, of which he's finished 73.4% of them. He's won all of his UFC fights, which have been 5 total. But let's go ahead and discuss reasons aside from stats alone as to why Taira will likely win. He has a versatile skill set with strong striking and exceptional grappling abilities, and an aggressive fighting style that can often overwhelm opponents. At 24 years old, Taira is in his physical prime and he's riding a wave of momentum, boosting his confidence and his performance in the octagon. In contrast, Perez has shown recent inconsistencies, including a 3-fight losing streak, which may indicate vulnerabilities. Taira's proficiency in securing submissions like rear naked chokes and triangle chokes can exploit Perez's susceptibility to submissions. While Perez has a strong wrestling base and extensive experience, Taira's relentless pressure and unpredictability can disrupt his game plan. Additionally, Taira's youth and momentum provide him with a mental and physical edge over the more experienced but recently struggling Perez. Although Perez's adaptability and experience are notable, Taira's aggressive approach and his submission skills are likely to be decisive, making him the likely fighter to win in this matchup. I think that Taira's actually going to get the finish here, but not via KO/TKO. I think Taira's going to win via submission. And with that, those are all of the fights for UFC Fight Night Perez versus Taira. I really hope that you all enjoyed and that your bets hit this weekend, and thank you guys so much for watching. Please like and subscribe, as it'll help keep me motivated in creating these videos for you all. Running this data and analysis and prediction models and the charts and graphs takes hours every day and week, so I'd greatly appreciate your support. Please also check out that Patreon if you'd like to support me through there. There's a $10 contribution option per month and a premium $20 option per month, which comes with access to all of this analysis from this video and promising underdogs, favorites, prop bets, and extra data analysis and stats as well. Trust me, it will help you with your bets, and it would help give me the support that I need to continue providing and expanding content for you all. So please check out that Patreon if you want to show some love and throw a little help my way. Thank you all again so much for watching, and as always, see you guys later this week for the bet video.